Okay, Venerable Robina is just coming in now.
Hi everyone, here I am. All right, we're all here.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. Welcome back. Thank you.
Good. Okay. All right. So remember our motivation. We're here to listen to these teachings so we can take some tools from it, so we can develop our amazing potential, so we can help others. That's it. Okay. So besides bodhicitta, besides the compassion wing, all this wisdom wing leads us, kind of this work we've done already leads us inexorably to get to the root of the problem, to get to get to the root of the problem, which is called ignorance, the root delusion, the root misconception, the root neurotic emotion, the root affliction. You know, the term they use in Sanskrit, whatever it is, I forget, but it's translated klesha, and it's translated in English as affliction. And it's an interesting word because I think we don't use it that much. It's rather old-fashioned, isn't it? A bit sort of arcane. That's the translation. So of course, what kind of affliction? I mean, affliction means some kind of problem, isn't it? Or an illness or something. Well, it's a mental one. It's a mental affliction. And it's kind of interesting because Lama Yeshe, who met Westerners first in the late 60s and then really started going in the early 70s, when I edit his teachings, I realized he somehow had this understanding from the very beginning of Western minds. It's very fascinating. The way the language he chose was really extraordinary. It was like he was born a hippie. He sort of, you know, the more you listen to very classical Tibetan teachings, and then you hear the way we talk in the West, it's very, very different, which is why at the beginning it sounds so arcane to us, you know. And Lama never actually, when I look at his words, he has his own kind of terminology to try, in his effort to try and explain to us these states of mind that we take so much for granted as normal parts of us, you know. So, I mean, I think in Mahamudra, I counted probably 21 or 22 different terms, synonyms, basically. But he never used the actual word affliction, which is a typical word. And it's something I never use either, because I think it's just an arcane word, you know. We think when we're Buddhists, we all have an affliction. I mean, it's because that's the word that's used, but we almost separate it from ordinary life. It's kind of like a special weird thing. It just means you've got attachment and anger and jealousy and depression and low self-esteem and neurosis, which is why you suffer and why you harm others. So, you know, there's a term in the West we use, it's very shocking. If you say mental illness, you get very shocked. It's a very powerful term in the West. She's got a mental illness. Something very concrete, you know. Well, it's not joking to say that Buddha says, to the extent that you have any attachment, any anger, any depression, any anxiety, any of the stuff that we call normal, to that extent, you're mentally ill. So really, mental illness is a really excellent translation of the term mental affliction. Geshe Sopa, for example, one of the lamas, you know, he always would say mental affliction, at least pointing it out. Just affliction, sure, it could be a knee ache, you know, it could be your husband leaving you as an affliction. So mental affliction is getting closer to home. Well, mental illness is a really perfect term. But it's still so shocking. Even though we're Buddhists, we're still shocked to say, oh, I've got mental illness. Like you got some kind of, it's like you got a leg missing or something. Some permanent kind of damage done to you that's irreversible. That's how we think about it. Well, Buddha's point is, there is no mental illness that you can't heal in the way he's talking. And it's all a question of degree. I mean, there are people in our world who we would say, in our terms, are mentally ill. They're people right at the other end of mental illness who really seem kind of, you can't do much for them. And that's true. Some people are like that. So they can't do anything for themselves. But we're on the, you know, talk about on the spectrum. It's a really good term. We're on the spectrum of mental illness. And this is not being sarcastic. It really isn't. The more we understand what Buddha's saying, the more we know that's exactly what he's saying. We've all got attachment. We've all got aversion to some degree or other. And this is why we suffer. These are the source of our suffering. They are our suffering itself, and they're the source of our future suffering. So we're talking here the job of trying to harness them. The first one is you control their servants, the body and speech, which is already a stupendous level of practice. Then you get into the real job of being your own therapist, working on your mind. And then this leads us, if we're doing on the wisdom wing component as opposed to the compassion, this leads us to then get to the root of the problem. So given that all these mental illnesses have a particular function of, their actual function is, their actual character is that they are conceptual, they're concepts. That is a thermos, is a concept. It's a concept. We're so used to thinking it's just the truth, you know, oh, it's the truth, it's just what it is. We're not looking at the subjective side. If I say it's a pink thermos, that's not truth. Conventional, just talking conventional truth here. You see, Buddhism talks about conventional truth, and that leads us to understand what they call ultimate truth, which sounds pretty abstract to us. But this is where we're heading now. So it's a misconception to say that's a pink thermos. Well, Buddha says we're living in misconceptions, and that's what the neurotic emotions are. They're not based in reality. So that little kind of that analysis I was doing of my response to, you know, Jason's bad behavior, anger, when he doesn't do what my attachment wants, and attachment is the main voice of the ego grasping. They've got this intimate relationship. So understanding these three, which are the source of all the other mental illnesses, all the other unhappy states of mind, understanding these three is fundamental to being a Buddhist. You know, because in our culture, we say, yes, I've got anger, but because we're so familiar, so caught up in believing that, well, let's now find the causes. And what we do is we look outside for the causes. You know, if I'm angry and then someone says, why? I will say, Jason cheated on me. Then go, oh, now I understand. That's how we think. So the Jason is the main cause of my anger. This is the first step the Buddha's telling us is no, he's only a catalyst. Of course, it sounds shocking to think this. It's shocking because it sounds like we're getting Jason off the hook. Oh, he's not really the problem after all. Oh, I see, it's all my fault. That's how we hear it. Nothing like that. So anger, what's the cause of anger? Well, actually, attachment is the cause of anger. It's a very interesting way to say it. Very internal, as we said. What's attachment? Attachment is the assumption that I should only get the nice things. So naturally, when the bad thing happens, of course, I get angry because that's the response when attachment is thwarted. This is so simple words, but such profound meaning. Nothing. So in a way, my practice isn't about Jason. I've got to make the decision to want to live with Jason. That's my call. I'm prepared to work on it. But if I'm in prison, I don't have the luxury. If I've got some, you know, wacko cellmate, I don't have the luxury of asking him to leave. Or me leaving. I've got to learn to work on my mind. There is no choice. That's why my friends in prison, I have such admiration for their practice. So what's the cause of attachment? Ego grasping. The assumption in the first place of this real, inherent, intrinsic, findable, pointable, separate me. So the key word here is the word dependent or independent. It's a simple word, but it's got massive meaning in Buddhist philosophy, absolutely vital to understand. So, you know, there are many logical arguments, many debates we need to engage in, first theoretically and then in our own mind in meditation, to argue, to debates with these misconceptions. They're misconceptions. I mean, it's a really simple understanding when you know that you've been so long addicted to believing that black is pink. Your eyes are wrong. So you've been living in a misconception for years. You've got a $5 note and you've convinced it's 50. It's a misconception. And this is the whole point that why Buddha says we suffer so badly. It's very reasonable. If you've got a $5 note, but you believe it's 50, you know you're setting yourself up for disappointment every single time you try to spend your $5. It's such a simple example because you have a misconception, but you're so addicted to believing the 5 is 50 that you don't even know you have a misconception. So you're wondering why you're always bumping into suffering because you've got a misconception, but you don't realize it's a misconception. So we don't realize that anger is a misconception or attachment is a misconception or ego grasping is a misconception. We just think they're truth. That's why we continually suffer. It's not moralistic, it's not punitive, it's kind of logical. But it takes time to get to see these states of mind in the way Buddhism describes them. So Buddha's saying, our mind is riddled with layers upon layers upon layers of misconceptions, all kinds. The ones we're talking here in terms of the emotional ones, anger, attachment, jealousy, anxiety, these ones, we've got this emotional component. But our mind is full of other misconceptions that are so ingrained in our being. One of the major ones he teaches is that he says that we all have this, as Lama Zopa puts it, this deep grasping belief in a permanent me. That's a grosser mistake and already a very powerful one to start to see, which leads us to the deeper mistake, to get to the deepest mistake, that there's an intrinsic independent me. This is a much harder one to get to. But the believing there's a permanent me is pretty evident. One of the major mistakes we make in the world, and this is from day one, is that we think everything, we assume things should last. And that's why we get, so, when your beautiful thermos breaks, we're sad. And we think we're sad because the thermos broke. No, we're sad because we have an assumption that it shouldn't break. And why do we have an assumption that it shouldn't break? Why do we have the view that it's permanent? I mean, we know intellectually it's not. So why do we have that emotional thing in there? Because we are attached to it. This is why we think about the impermanence of this person. One of the major teachings Buddha gets us to think about in day one is the impermanence of this person. And that's called death, We do not like that word. So what is so clear, we believe, even though intellectually we know perfectly well, we know we're not permanent. We know why. But we can't bear the thought of it. So we live in this fantasy. And that's what we're doing to everything. So like I said, when you have, I use the example of, like I said before, Nicole Kidman, for example, saying, we will be together until we are 80. This is attacking the misconception of grasping at things as lasting forever. And why do we think that? Because we are enormously attached to that scenario and can't bear to think it will change. So I think instinctively we know from countless lifetimes of experience that things do change, but we live frantically in denial of it. It's too painful for us because we can't bear to not have that thing, that thermos, that relationship, this body. So we have this lie that we have made up. There's no basis in reality. So understanding impermanence is a marvelous stepping stone to understand the subtler, the deeper, the more primordial mistake of seeing some intrinsic me. This is a major reason we suffer, so clear. But again, we put the blame on the outside. We think we suffer because our husband leaves us. No, we suffer because we had a deep assumption that he shouldn't leave us. It's so simple, but it's so shocking to hear it. So realizing impermanence, as they would say, realizing that things do change, which on the face of it seems evident, but emotionally we don't get, is already a profound way to change your life. You become more realistic, you become more relaxed, easygoing, less fearful, more accepting of things when they happen that you don't like. It already helps you lessen attachment and lessen anger. It's a stepping stone to understanding the deeper misconception, the root misconception. So it's known as ignorance, ma-rigpa in Tibetan, unawareness. So ignorance is a pretty straightforward state of mind. If you say to me, what's that, Robina? And I'd say, oh, I don't know, what is it? And you'll say, it's a thermos. I'll say, oh, thank you very much. Now I know what it is. That's an easy ignorance to fix. That ignorance we can fix in a minute. You tell me what it is. I've got no assumption in my mind about anything. I've just got ignorance. I now have got wisdom. I now know what it is. If our ignorance, the way Buddha describes, is like that, then we could get enlightened in a couple of years, because there's nothing resisting the truth. There's nothing resisting our understanding of reality. But the ignorance we've got is not only the ignorance we've got is like, I'm convinced, like the black and pink one. What color is that, Robina? It's pink. And that's wrong, but I've been believing it's pink for so long, I even see pink. I project pink onto it. And I totally believe it. And it's not a possibility in my mind to think it's anything else. That's the kind of ignorance. So not only do I not know the truth, that it's black, I believe in the lie. So that's double kind of ignorance. And that's the kind of ignorance that Buddha's describing here. So this ego grasping, which is a colloquial term for this primordial ignorance, not only doesn't know how the I, and indeed everything else, actually exists, which is as a dependent arising, as something that's interdependent. And these words are very powerful in Buddhism. Not only do I not know the truth that the I is an interdependent phenomenon, it's a dependent arising. It exists in dependence upon various factors. Not only do we not know that truth, we believe in the exact opposite, that there is in here an independent, intrinsic, inherent, definite, absolute, findable, pointable, separate me. That's the lie we've been believing in for so long. And this is the point. Believing in lies is why we suffer. Because you're always disappointed. You always get upset. You're always disappointed because it's not how things are. But we believe it is. Like that $50 note. It's not 50, but you believe 5 is 50. You go with all the expectations every time to get $50 worth, and you're disappointed because you only get $5 worth. Not because, so you're not disappointed because you didn't get $50 worth. You're disappointed and upset because you got the wrong view. It isn't 50, it's 5. This is why we suffer. So believing in things that don't exist is why we suffer. It sounds so peculiar to us. But these lies in our mind, attachment, aversion, all the others, and the root lie, are so primordial, they're eons old. We don't even know that they're lies. We don't even think of them as lies. We believe their stories. We believe their assumptions. We believe 1,000,000,000% that things are permanent. We believe 1,000,000,000% that there's an intrinsic me. We believe 1,000,000,000% that the Jasons are cause of my happiness and Jasons are cause of my suffering. We believe in those, and every time we react, we reinforce them. We deepen those lies in the grooves of our mind. This is why we suffer. So changing our mind, getting it in sync with reality, is the method for getting happy. So let's look at this lie of an intrinsic me. And intrinsic everything else for that matter. The work of thinking about karma is leading us to that. It's a good example of the first level of dependent arising. So a good way of looking into this reality is in the framework of the 2 truths, as Buddhism would call it. Conventional truth and ultimate truth. Final. Conventionally how things exist, which is the logic to prove how things exist ultimately. The 2 truths. So the shorthand for conventional reality is the term dependent arising, that everything that does exist conventionally, everything, a cup, a toilet, a person, a computer, a Buddha, a hell realm, a lamp, whatever it is we can establish as existing conventionally. And we have to first do that. So you can begin to talk about it. You've got to be all on the same page. Everything that exists, and in Buddhist philosophy, when you study, you learn about six synonyms, I think, for that which exists. This is really a major starting point. You know, an existent is one of the synonyms for something that exists. Phenomenon, an object. An object doesn't mean something physical. An object is something that exists. A moment of anger is an object. It's an existent. Phenomenon, object, or object of knowledge, existent, established base. There's 5 of them, maybe there's just 5. So Buddha's basically saying our minds are full of misconceptions that cause us to not be in sync with reality, which is why we suffer. So we first have to establish, even conventionally, what exists. Be all on the same page. We label something. What is that? We label it as a thermos. What's a thermos, Mummy? Well, as you see, it's a flat-bottomed metal container that keeps my water hot. Now I know what a thermos is. And the second part of that definition is also a crucial thing to understand. You can say it's a flat-bottomed metal container, and it is that. but it doesn't help you much. But mummy, what is it? What does it do? What's its function? What's its job? What's its meaning? It holds my tea. It keeps it hot. Now we know what it is conventionally. It's very important. And this is a huge one to understand when we get to understand emptiness. What's its function? So we have to state everything like that. What is a computer? What is a lamp? Then we're all on the same page. We all agree, and then we can communicate. We understand this when it comes to what we call science. We're all on the same page, very clear with our definitions. But when it comes to our emotions, that's where we have so much suffering. I can tell Jason, I love you, and he says, I love you. We think we're communicating. We think we've both got the same definition. No, he writes down what he means by love and his expectations, and I write down mine. We're talking two different languages. No wonder we fight. We have no agreement about the definition of these words. But we do when it comes to math. If you think 1 + 1 is 3, you're in trouble. And you can't get anywhere. So we all agree on those things. And this is the same clarity that Buddha says it demands to know our minds well. So there are 3 levels at which things exist interdependently. And interdependence is the conventional truth. And it's, as Lama Yeshe puts it, paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, it's the king of logics to prove the ultimate way that things exist, the final way that things exist. And the shorthand for that is the word emptiness. So the discussion we had yesterday, we've got to know what that word means. It's very misleading to us initially. So basically, attachment is a delusion. That's one of the main voices of ego grasping. And its lie is to over-exaggerate Jason's deliciousness, over-exaggerate his role in making me happy. It's like over-exaggerating the value of the $5. So that's really, I expect him to do exactly what I think, which is to make me happy, which is to do what my attachment wants. That's the suffering of attachment, right there, you know. And it's pervasive, multitude of levels of it. Anger's misconception is the thwarted attachment didn't get what it wanted, so then anger is outraged. How dare he not do what I want? These are misconceptions, completely inappropriate, outrageous, kind of fascist. To dare we dump those onto other people. No wonder we harm each other. You know. Outrageous, completely shocking. And they're rooted in the assumption of an intrinsic Jason, an intrinsic this, an intrinsic that. Of course, that part's abstract to us. We can get attachment and aversion in the way we're talking. It's harder, obviously. And why? Because that delusion is completely ingrained in our being. And very, therefore, hard to see the mistake. In other words, and we can even see that with attachment and aversion. If I'm really convinced that Jason is the cause of my suffering, nothing on the planet will change my mind. I will only see an angry person, ugly person, horrible person. That's the person I'll see. And this is the point, as Lama Zopa puts it. The way the outside world appears back to us, how it is reflected back in the mirror of our mind, how it appears back to us is in exactly the aspect of what's in our mind. Our mirror dictates the way the world appears to us, and that's our mind. This is so profound. So as long as I've got attachment for something, it'll always appear more delicious than it is. I'll always have the expectation that it must make me happy. Even if every day it disappoints me, which it does. I forget the next day that the cake, the very thing that I think will make me happy, is the thing that made me vomit. We forget that part. We forget that part because we're desperate for that happiness, so we try it again next day. So we're very addicted to these lies. These lies are hard enough to change. Can you only imagine how hard it is to get to the root lie, to even identify it? This is the really subtle point. So that's why we have to first think about it intellectually, understand the theories, get the words right. So the 3 levels of dependent arising, 3 levels at which things that exist in dependence upon various factors. There's millions of ways in which things exist interdependently, but there's these 3 particular ways that Buddha has taken from the previous views that he argued with, from which he diverged when he presented Buddhism. One is that the first level is an argument with the prevailing view at the time that there So the first one is, is an argument with the idea that there's an uncaused, unchanging essence called a self. Christians call it a soul. That's the equivalent of the term. Atman is the Hindu one. But it's really meaning the same as a soul. We talk in the West, don't we? There's a body and a mind and a soul. Or people say spirit. Buddha has no third component. Which not means he's like a communist and thinks there's no soul. He doesn't mean it's not. It's more, he says mind, and mind is not physical. So there's a subtle level of our mind. You can argue very loosely is like what we think is a soul. But it's more the argument, not so much that there isn't something more than just the body. There is. But the Buddha's point is it's the way the self exists. So Buddha's not saying there's no self. He's not saying there's no essence. He's not saying there's no, it's the way that what we are exists that's the difference. That's the point, He doesn't use the word soul or self. So the first level of argument of cause and effect is an argument of the first level of dependent arising, that there is a self, but you can't pinpoint an uncaused, unchanging self, a permanent self. No such thing. So learning about karma is a profound way to help us understand that. Then the second level of dependent arising. And this sounds pretty kind of, again, weird, kind of sort of boring in a way. That everything exists in dependence upon its parts. So, of course, we've got to know clearly what Buddha means by that. So when we learn about how the universe consists of impermanent phenomena, there's matter, which is the four elements. And then there's mind. Well, the parts of a mind are the moments of the mind. This moment of anger, that moment of anger, they're parts. They're parts. And then what are the parts of the body? Well, the parts of the body, the gross senses, nose and ear and eyes, and pretty straightforward. But in general, any physical phenomenon, the Buddha's analysis is everything is made of the four elements. There's matter and there's minds. And matter, the lamp, the computer, they're made of the four elements. Color. So, for example, the objects of eye consciousness, color and shape. The object of ear consciousness, sound. The object of touch consciousness, each of these they're the physical world, and they're all made of the four elements. They're all matter, and the implication of things having parts is they're sort of like dynamic, So the Buddha would say you can never find a partless. The second argument, I'm conflating these first two views a little bit. It's okay, but there's a view that there's a partless, a separate piece, a separate piece called I. There's a nose, an ear, and an eye. There's a separate piece. That's the body, the mind, and the self. The body, the mind, and the soul. Buddha argues with that. We don't need a separate self. There isn't one, he says, and we don't need one. We believe utterly, and our language expresses that. We say, I have a nose. That's two nouns, isn't it? And there's one type of debate, which we always do when we discuss this. Some of you might be familiar. One debate we have to do, logically, to argue, to break down this misconception, is that if something does exist, then you've got to point it out. You have to point something out. It's one thing, or it's more than one. There's only two options. So when we say, I have a thermos and a computer. So we check that. Even when I say that, it's very interesting. If I say that to you, okay, you can't see the computer now, but you can deduce that I'm using a computer. Or I'll keep it more simple. I've got a thermos and a mala. So a mala is this string of beads that you use to count your mantras, okay? So then straight away, you're going to check immediately. You hear the sounds, you speak English, and you look at where the sound comes from, my voice, and you check. She said the statement, I have a thermos and a mala. So you go, that's interesting. Well, that's three phenomena, isn't it? Let's count. Well, there's the thermos, there's the I, and there's the mala. That's a fact. So you can tick the box and you can have confidence in me that I'm not crazy. If I say I have an elephant in my right hand, you'll feel sorry for me. So I said three things there. It's a very simple thing. It's almost so simple we don't get it. I have a mala and a thermos. That's three nouns. Okay, one pronoun. So that's 3 phenomena, isn't it? 3 phenomena, 3 things. So if you say there are 3 things, you have to count 3 things. If you say you have $3 coins, you need to find $3 coins. You can't argue with that. There's got to be 1 and 2 and 3. 3 separate dollars. Very simple. If you say 3, you mean 3. So I just said 3 things. I have a thermos and a mala. That's one phenomenon is called an eye, called Robina. Another phenomenon is called a thermos. And a third phenomenon is called the mala. Pretty straightforward. That's a very simple example of 3, both separate and independent. In this case, they are independent of each other. They're not dependent in any way. And in terms of their function, the thermos doesn't need a mala to hold my tea hot. And Robina does not need a mala for her to be functioning as Robina. And a mala doesn't need Robina to be functioning as a mala. Robina can drop dead and the thermos can break. Mala's fine. So they both, that's an example, a simple example of 3 independent and separate phenomena. Easy to understand. Now I'll make another statement, and now it's getting more subtle, getting more nuanced, getting more tricky. My thermos has a base and a lid. Well, it doesn't now. So we'll just say my thermos has a base. So that's 2 nouns, isn't it? Thermos and base. So I said before, I have a mala and a thermos. Easy to point out. Now I'll say another statement. My thermos has a base. My thermos, 1 noun, has a base, a 2nd noun. So I can even point to the base. Look, there's the base. Now, without analysis, we can say that's a true statement, and there's no argument. It is true. But what we don't realize is we are putting a lie onto that. We are assuming there are 2 things there. So we mightn't feel that so much with the thermos, but we do when I say I have a nose. Same type of thing. There is a thermos that does have a base. There is a person who does have a nose. No problem. But the problem is that when we say I, we are assuming there is a phenomenon somewhere here that bears the label I, that is the owner of another thing called a nose. We assume that. We feel it every day. We believe this I is around here somewhere in the middle of our heart. We say that word with such power. So all Buddha is saying is we are overstating the actual ontological status itself of that I. We're giving it more, we're adding like bells and whistles that don't exist. We believe when we say I have a nose, that there is an I there that is the owner of the nose. We really believe there are 2 separate, independent phenomena. And Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. So, one example of how that's not true, a perfect proof. Like I said before, I have a mala. So my mala breaks, you know. It has not, because it is separate and independent from Robina. Robina is not affected. She's not affected. She's not affected. Well, I mean, she's attached to it. She might be, but that's not the issue. Because Robina is a separate and independent phenomenon from the mala. So Robina is not affected. The person is not affected when the mala. In other words, if the mala breaks, I don't get like a pain in my, you know, like stab or something. It's separate. It's over there. Separate, different, separate. Now, if there is in here, which we instinctively believe, so instinctively that when we hear this, we're puzzled by it, we don't get it. If there is a separate lie in there, a mini me that runs the show, a puppeteer or something, like we think vaguely. If there is a separate me, when the nose gets cut, the I, the separate me, won't be affected. It will look on and go, oh, phew, I'm glad it wasn't me who got cut. Poor old nose, I feel sorry for it. Now, we know it's not like that. So we know I do feel pain. We say that. But what Buddha is saying, this is where it's more nuanced. We say I feel pain, but there's not a separate I that feels pain. So then that's the I we can't pinpoint. And this leads us to the subtlest meaning that there isn't an I that you can point out that is separate from the nose. But you can't separate. You can't separate I from the nose. Look at this. My base, so I've got a thermos that has a base. That's 2 nouns. Take the base away from the rest of this container, and what do I have in my left hand? I do not have a thermos. And I don't have a base. It's a piece of it's a piece of round metal. It's no longer a base, and this is no longer a thermos, because you can't separate them. They're not the same. This is the point. They're not the same thing. A thermos, if you give a definition of a thermos, it's a flat-bottomed metal container that holds my tea, keeps my tea hot. What's the definition of a base of a thermos? It's the bottom part that prevents the tea from dripping out. They're 2 separate phenomena. They're 2 different definitions. They are different, but you can't separate them. So the eye is not the nose, and the nose is not the eye. Exactly the same, but you can't separate them. They're different, but you can't separate them. You can't point out a thermos without, you can't point out a thermos that doesn't exist in dependence upon a base. So you can't point out an eye, in this case a Robina, that exists separately from the nose. You can't do that. So it's a more nuanced one of the first one. And this is the one we have to learn to understand. And that leads us eventually to realize the actual meaning of dependent arising, that the I is merely labeled. You can't pinpoint, you can't find, you can't point to a separate I. An I that's independent of the parts. You can't. That's the part that's subtle. So the first one is to see if we can find that I that we are so convinced exists there. And that's the hard work. So in the teachings, like in Pabonka Rinpoche and Liberation, in the palm of your hand, in the section on realizing emptiness at the final stages of the Bodhisattva path in conjunction with single point of concentration, you have to do the 4-point analysis. So the first one, so basically Buddha's telling us there is no independent I, Robina. You can't find an I separate from the parts. You can't. You won't. You can't. He's telling us that already in advance. But because we so believe there is, it's not enough to believe him. That doesn't shake the misconception. We have to prove it for ourselves. So the first step in that is, they say, the first step in this 4-point analysis is to point out, is to locate the object to be negated. And this is the tough part. Once we've accomplished that, we can realize emptiness immediately. So it's like this. So then Buddha says, guess we have to search for it. Even though we know in advance, he's telling us there's no I there, but we have to search for it and prove it for ourselves. So in the end, there's 2 options we have to establish. We have to establish the parameters of our search. The next one is the parameters of our search, and then we do the searching. So there's 2 options. We've just discussed one of them. If there is an I that can be pointed out and found, we have to establish the parameters of our search. So the parameters of our search are in the aggregates. The Buddha would talk about the 5 aggregates as a way he presented what makes up a person in one of his sutras. We can just simply talk about the parts. We've got to search within, because here are the parameters. If you're looking for the essence of a thermos, you've got to look at the parameters, the parts of the thermos. So here we have to first establish what we think that I is, and that's the hardest part. The second one is we establish the parameters of our search. There is either, if there is an I, it is either separate from the parts, or oneness with the parts. There's only two options. We establish those first, the parameters. And then we use logic to argue the next second and third and fourth points. We logically argue to prove there is no I that is separate, and we prove there is no I oneness with. And so logically the conclusion is there is no independent I, and we realize emptiness. That's the first argument, but there's a more subtle level eventually. We conclude that it's merely labeled, which is dependent arising. It's a bit like this, you know, if there's like, you know, there's a big room and there's thousands of things in that room, like there would be in any, like I'm looking at my kitchen here, in my dining room, my lounge room, there's hundreds of things. And if I say to you, please go and get my iPad, but you're too embarrassed to admit you don't know what an iPad is. You've never heard of an iPad. You have no idea what you're looking for. It could be anything, but you're too afraid to admit. So you could look in this room for thousands of years. I mean, you take a long time. You have to first establish every single other thing. You have to say, there's carnations, there's a statue, there's this, there's a cord, there's a chair. And eventually you can deduce, eventually you might end up with something you don't know, and then you might deduce it's an iPad. But in the end, you have to know what you're looking for. If you know what an iPad is, you can come into this house and you will search, and you will do a proper search. You want to search vaguely. So this is the point, you have to become convinced there's no I, not just vaguely believe there's no I, an independent I. So you can't just vaguely believe there is no iPad or there is an iPad. And we're talking here about a thing that could exist. The difference here about an independent I, it could never exist. So it's a much more subtle argument, but the principle's the same. So if you're looking for an iPad, you first have to establish the first of the 4 points, the object to be negated. What am I looking for? An iPad. What's an iPad? And once you know what an iPad is, you can come into this room, and you might have to search quite a bit, but you can eventually, once you've looked every single where, in all the cupboards, under the roof, behind the walls, whatever you like, you will be able to definitively, absolute with certainty, come to the conclusion, either there is an iPad, in which case you give me my iPad, or you will come to the conclusion that there is no iPad. And that means you will discover the emptiness of the iPad, the absence. Emptiness just means absent. Don't think of it as some cosmic thing, the absence of something. So when you're looking for an iPad, even just on my table, you can be certain there's either an iPad there, in which case you give it to me and I'm happy, or you will say with certainty, Robina, there is no iPad. So another way of putting there is no iPad is that you just discovered on my table the absence of an iPad. It's a very crucial way to understand how they talk about it. It seems a kind of funny way to put it. I have discovered, Robina, that the absence of an iPad on your table. That's a valid way to put it, because that's what we have to discover in here. We have to discover, having first established exactly what we think this independent I is, which in fact doesn't exist, so it's very tricky, but it's quite subtle. We have to first establish how it appears to us. How does that I appear to us? Because we believe in it. Everything we do and say and think is on the assumption of the presence of the I. Every word we say, every action we do, every thought we have right now, being samsaric, is on the assumption of the existence of an independent I. So everything is faulty. And this is why we suffer. So we have to have some certainty. And the only way we can find this certainty, of course, is finally in single-pointed concentration. When we have shamatha, we've got this brilliant laser-like, incredible subtle focus. It's only then, at that level of mind, that's powerful enough to recognize the truth that there isn't and never has been and can't be an independent I. That's way more subtle. But the principle to understand is like, you've got to first establish what it is you're looking for. You establish those parameters. Then you do the searching. So the same, you have to first know what an iPad is. And only then, and that's a simple example because an iPad can exist. It's a simple example. And if you're not certain what an iPad is, you will neither find an iPad, nor will you be certain there is no iPad. You'll never be certain. You have to be certain. And then you have to establish what you're looking for. It's an easy example. So here, the first one, we have to establish how this independent I appears to us. And that's really subtle. And this is why you can't do that if you haven't done the first stages of work by abiding by controlling your body and speech and living in abiding by the laws of karma and doing masses of purification. That kind of puts atomic bombs under the weeds that are choking your mind. When you put atomic bombs under the karmic habits and put atomic bombs under the actions and control your body and speech, living in vows and purifying, this is what gives your mind space to even begin to see what the hell's going on. That's why you can't leap into this without the earlier work. And then you go to high school and start to unpack and unravel the other delusions, which are the branches of ego grasping. Then you start to become familiar with them, and then it really makes it easier for you now to begin to understand emptiness. It's all preparing your mind, like anything. You can't leap into university level. It's not possible unless you're super intelligent, unless you've done it before in a past life. Like some of these kids who are playing Bach at the age of 6, you know, because you've done it before. So we have to establish what we think, how we think this independent I functions. And how do you do that? By watching your mind like a hawk every second. Now, this is a problem. This is already pretty advanced. What happens is this. Jason says a mean word to me. And what happens is, because I've got an ego grasping, which has attachment to get what the ego wants, which has anger when it doesn't get what it wants, and they're the habits, and the second he says a mean word, I leap into upset. How dare you say that to me? You've just that minute missed the opportunity to check out how the I feels. So already to be able to do that assumes you've done masses of purification, assumes you're living in your vows, assumes you've got control of your body and speech, and assumes you have control over your mind. It's so subtle because we respond like an idiot. We respond immediately with our emotion. You've just missed the opportunity. Because the way Lama talks about it in Mahamudra, it's a different approach to seeing the I. It's a wonderful meditation to do. I really recommend Lama's book. The ego is like a thief. You try to catch it inside. You try to catch the way this I feels to you. It doesn't exist, but you've got to catch the way it appears to you. This is quite subtle. This is quite subtle. In other words, you know, when you're driving a car and you'll get run over by a truck. I've had a few of those experiences because I speed, you see, and I've stopped driving now because that's too dangerous. I'll never forget one time. I'll never forget as long as I live. One time I was driving all night. I had this for quite a few years, back in 10 years ago, I bought this nice dark green, racing green Mercedes, $5,000, because someone got some money and I bought this nice Mercedes. And I had this fantasy when I got to Australia, because I'd go every 6 months, you know, every year. I'd drive from Sydney to Melbourne to Brisbane. I thought it'd be sounding nice to drive on the coast and stay in a hotel and things instead of taking airplanes. Well, it was a disaster because I'm just a speed freak. I have to put my foot on that accelerator and I have to pass cars. I just can't sit there, be quiet and go at whatever the low bloody speed limit in Australia is. It's so pathetic, like 4 miles an hour or something. I just can't do it. That's why I prefer to drive in Germany where there's no speed limit. I'll be in the fast lane at 180 k's an hour. It's heaven. So it's just impossible for me to drive a car without putting my foot on the accelerator. So I mean, of course, in Australia, you never meet a policeman. Got all these cameras, isn't it? I got hundreds of dollars worth of fines. And I mean, this particular time I nearly got killed. It's like beyond a miracle. I still think about it. It was very fascinating. Talk about the I rising. It was 4 in the morning and I was heading to Sydney from Melbourne. I was nearly there. And of course, driving all night, you know, driving all night. And there's a big semi-trailer. And but I didn't know how long it was. It was a single lanes. And there's this long truck. So I started passing it. And of course, it's not slowing down. And I see there's a car coming because the lights are still on. It's kind of dawn. And this car's coming and I see he's not stopping. He's not slowing down. And I realize I just can't get past this truck. I just can't do it. It's too long. And I had to make this, I mean, it's absolutely like a miracle. I can't describe to you. So definitely the I was rising so strong there. So I had to make a split-second decision, you know, I had no choice. I had to get out of the way because the car coming's not getting out of the way and the truck has no space. So I just suddenly made a quick decision just before the car and I hit at 120 kilometers an hour, you know. I went into the dirt. Now, he could have driven into the dirt as well and we could have gone head on in the dirt, but somehow he didn't. Like, I swear to you, I sat in that, I could not believe it. Even now, I can't believe it. It was like a complete miracle that I was still alive, you know. And I was telling you, ridiculous. Speeding is so ridiculous, my stupid mind. But the point is this, the sense of I was so vivid, I can't tell you. And that's the thing. So when you haven't, if we can catch that I, and that means you don't mind if you get angry. You don't mind if Jason's mean to you. In other words, if you're really trying to catch the I and he shouts at you and you grab your mind and you're checking, you shouldn't say, hey, Jason, shout again. I want to get the feeling of the I. But we don't say that. We say, how dare you? And then we've missed the opportunity. So if you grab the opportunity when the car nearly runs you over, you go, oh, wow, this is fantastic. Now I can see the I. And you hold it and you check. That's what you have to do. And if you're sitting in meditation, trying to realize emptiness, they say what you should do when you sit down, you remember the event when you nearly died, when Jason abused you. You catch and to literally bring up that feeling of panic, which is coming as a result of grasping at an intrinsic I. But you've got to not buy into the story. So it's such a powerful experience. And that's what we have to do. We say, be glad if someone abuses you. Be glad if some car nearly runs you over, because you grab the opportunity to catch the I. But that's a gross level. You've got to practice doing that, not just buying into the story, poor me. No, that's what we do. It's a very powerful experience. So you have to first establish how you think that phenomenon exists. And Lama Yeshe says, once you've established exactly how you think that independent I exists, once you're confident, that second you will recognize the emptiness of it. That second you will recognize the absence of it. If you are certain what an iPad is, and I walk in here and look at the dining room table, in 1 second I can establish the emptiness of that iPad right there on that table. I can establish that with certainty, because I know exactly what an iPad is. But if I'm not certain what I'm looking for, you just muddle around. Oh, maybe there's an iPad, maybe there's not. So when you're certain what you think the independent I is, which is extremely subtle, it's only then, and in subtle concentration, it's only then you will recognize, then you'll realize the emptiness of it. Any questions?
Venerable Robina, we did have some questions from before the break.
Not about emptiness. Are there any questions about emptiness first? Just check. Anybody in the group who wants to put your hand up just before? I'll hear those later. Are there any about what I've just said? If not, it's perfectly fine. You don't have to. No questions? Okay, that's fine. Tell me what the questions are. Then we'll go back to emptiness after the questions.
Just quickly, Frances did say before the break that she just got the first inkling of emptiness. Thank you, Venerable Robina. And now bit by bit, here we go. So
that's it. Wonderful, Frances. Perfect, darling.
But also, Nicholas had a question about reincarnation.
Yes.
Asks, many of the teachings and stories of the Buddha are so compelling to me because I can observe the effects on my mind when I investigate them. But now I struggle with the concept of reincarnation because it seems so ethereal and it's less clear how to investigate this idea.
Mm-hmm.
You discussed reincarnation a bit already, but I'm still struggling. Can you give me some other advice about how to investigate this concept more deeply?
Absolutely. You've got to learn the theory. There's no shortcut. You don't try to sort of squeeze your brain and try and imagine what it's like to be a dog and how come you can be a dog. You've got to learn the theories. That means you have to take on board the Buddhist view about the consciousness. You've got to, that's the first one. It's fundamental. You've got to understand what Buddha means by the mind. You're not trying to squeeze yourself to believe it, but you have to take it as your hypothesis. You have to do that. You can't just leap into the most advanced level of acupuncture and try and imagine how putting a needle there will heal you. You've got to learn the theories. There's no shortcut. You have to first start at the beginning. So the fundamental one is you listen to the view about a creator. So there's one option that as a superior being who gives you a soul. There's another argument that the mother and father create you, which means you're only physical. There are two clear philosophical presentations. So the third one, if you don't have to go and disprove the other ones necessarily, but you want to, if you decide you want to take on board Buddha's view, then you don't have to try and disprove everything else. Don't worry about it. You just decide you want to prove acupuncture. You don't have to disprove other systems. You want to prove acupuncture. You can't leap to the end result and imagine what it's like. How can I be a dog? You've got to understand first what the mind is. which is it's not physical, and if it is not physical, and if it's not the handiwork, and the key point is to at least take on board the hypothesis that you're not made by someone else, because that's the one thing that the creative views and the materialist views share, that someone else makes you. This for Buddha is wacko and weird. I'm not trying to be silly. So you just take on board that view and you start hypothesizing. So if there is a consciousness, a continuity of mental moments, and you can't prove that yet, you've got to hypothesize it. If there is a continuity of mental moments, this moment of my mind comes from the previous moment, in an unbroken chain of mental moments, and you keep tracking it back when you came out of your mummy's womb. When you popped out of your mummy's womb shouting, and we know from pictures in the medical thing that there's a moving body in there, so we can deduce there's a mind in that body in the fetus, and you keep tracking back, and you get back to the first second of conception. So you get back that far conceptually, and then you think, well, if I'm not created by someone else, if I'm not the handiwork of mummy and daddy, and I'm not the handiwork of a creator, and you're hypothesizing this, well, where does that moment of mind that first entered the egg and sperm, where does that come from? Well, the hypothesis here is it comes from a previous moment of that continuity of mind. This is not very conceptually too complicated, but you've got to hypothesize it. You're not trying to prove it yet. You can't do that yet. You've got to wait. You've got to put the components in first. Then you think, well, that mind, where did that moment of mind come from, the second before conception? Well, it has to come from a previous second of the mind. And where did that come from? Another second before that. As His Holiness says, using this view, it's quite easy to prove the concept of reincarnation. Because if you take the view, a continuity of non-physical mental moments, then the main cause of a non-physical mental moment is a previous non-physical mental moment. So you hypothesize this. So then it's not a complicated concept to have. You don't have to force yourself to believe it. We try to force ourselves to believe it or force ourselves to prove it already. You can't do that yet. You just got to hypothesize it. That's not too complicated. So then you have a hypothesis of a continuity of mental moments. So where did that mind come from? Well, you listen to the teachings of Buddha says about karma. You don't try to prove it. You can't. You're leaping ahead of yourself. You hypothesize it. You learn those theories. And then you think about it every day. And you think about it every day. And then you apply it in your daily life every day. What else can you do? There's only that. There's only that. Don't struggle with it and fight with it and argue with it. And maybe you've got to look at why you resist even hypothesizing this idea. I mean, it's an idea. It's a view. And then then the other thing is that if you check up on the sources of this information, that's the more you think about the Buddha, and the more you think about the people you see who study Buddhism, and you see the people who teach Buddhism, that should give you confidence. If the Dalai Lama is giving you some teachings and he teaches this, you think, well, he seems a pretty good example of this stuff, and it gives you some confidence. If you meet mathematicians every day who keep telling you the same thing, and they all seem reasonable gentlemen and reasonable ladies, you're not going to be crazy. But if they're all weird wacko people who say strange words, you can't have confidence in them. So you've got to first look at the theories yourself and read it. And where do you read it? In the sources. Which are the sources? Which are the people who practice this stuff? And then you look at the lineages. So that gives you confidence. So all you can do is hypothesize it, and you just act according to it, one step at a time. You're not proving it. You don't just shove it down your throat. Don't have fear of it. What is the problem with it? That's what we have to do. You can't learn anything any other way. Who asked that question?
That was Nicholas.
Where are you, Nicholas? Are you around? Come to me. Talk to me, Nicholas. Okay, there you are. Are you hearing my point, Nicholas? Where's your problem with this? Why is this a problem for you, thinking like this?
It's not a problem.
You said you struggle with it, so it must be a problem. So what's the struggle for you?
Just all the teachings of Buddha that I've come across so far, I just think are amazing. But this idea is just something that...
But you've got to look at what it is in resisting the idea that it's a hypothesis, and you take it on board as a hypothesis and just work with it and relax with it. What are you resisting that for? Because that's what I'm saying. You try to force yourself to believe it, and that's not the wrong. It's the wrong approach. It's like you've never heard of acupuncture. You've only been an allopathic person, and suddenly you hear about it and you're struggling with it. You've got to see why you're struggling with it. It's either valid or it's not, and you can't leap into believing it. You've got to look into it as a hypothesis and start to study it, and then slowly all the pieces will come together. Or you will discover that theoretically it doesn't stand up. There's no shortcut, Nicholas. This is the way to do it. Are you with me? Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yes, thank you, Robina.
So do you have a willingness to hypothesize the possibility that your mind isn't physical, and that it doesn't come from a creator and doesn't come from your mummy and daddy, and it certainly can't come from nothing? Are you prepared to hypothesize that and then think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the mind, there's a number of different hypotheses in my mind, and So,
Where? Which one? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the Buddhist one. There's only one. What are you talking about? What are you saying to me, Nicholas?
I mean, I'm just like with consciousness. I mean, I don't know where consciousness comes from.
How you got? But I know. But Nicholas, you don't know how needles will heal people in acupuncture. How will you find out?
Right. I don't know. Just.
That'd be ridiculous. How will you find out and prove whether acupuncture is right or wrong? What would you do, Nicholas?
I don't know. I'd have to. I would
Nicholas, how would you prove? Someone tells you that Nicholas, someone tells you that 1 + 1 is 2, and you've never heard of it before. How do you prove whether it's right or wrong?
I mean, I don't
What would you do?
know.
I beg your pardon?
With 1 + 1, I just know that it's.
No, let's say you don't know. No, Nicholas, let's say you've never heard of it. What is the next step for you to prove whether or not it's true? What would you do?
I mean, I'd have to explore the principle.
Darling, Nicholas, it's called studying the theory. Have you never, I mean, is that not what you do? Have you any knowledge in life? What have you studied in life? What do you know in life? What's your expertise?
I'm an economist, so I
studied
economics.
You've learned how to count, you've learned how to drive a car, and you've learned how to do different things. You didn't know them at some point, did you? And someone taught you, didn't you? And then you practiced them, and then you learned to know that they were true. Well, that's how you do here. It's nothing mysterious, Nicholas. If you wanted to, if you don't know physics, you'd have to study it, and then you can prove that Einstein is right. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
If someone says acupuncture works, you don't just believe in it and go, oh, I don't know how acupuncture works. You just said, I don't know where the mind comes from. I know you don't. Then you learn some theories. You decide which one do you want to take. You can learn Jung if you like. You can learn materialism if you like. You can learn neuroscience if you like. You can learn the Christian view if you like. It's your decision which one you want to learn. You are the boss of your life, Nicholas. You better take some body of knowledge and you decide you want to engage in it. That's the step you have to take. Don't just sit there puzzling about it. You'll never get answers that way. Are we communicating, sweetheart?
Yes, thank you.
Do you want to know, would you like to delve into the Buddhist view about the mind and reality? Do you want to study that? Do you like that? You've chosen, you say you like some Buddhist ideas, right? Is that true?
Yes.
So do you want to do more of that and discover whether you think Buddha's right or wrong? Do you want to do that? Would you like to do that?
Yes.
Well,
I'm reading a book called The Tibetan Book of the Living and the Dying at the moment.
Okay, well, that won't give you much. Very nice book. It won't give you much theory. It's okay, but slowly you keep moving, honey. You just keep moving and reading and thinking about it and keep your mind open and check out more books. The Dalai Lama, you can't go wrong. He's a valid source. And you just start to slowly learn to study it. But you've got to take the view. That's why I say it's a working hypothesis. It's a really powerful point. It sounds kind of a bit grand, but you've got to decide, I'm prepared to look into the Buddhist view and try and see what they mean by reincarnation, what I've got to see what they mean by what the mind is. You've got to study it so you can give yourself some answers, so you can think about it. You've got to go one step at a time, Nicholas. Not just puzzle over it and resist it. Are you with me? Because the point is, Buddha might be wrong, but you've got to be prepared to investigate it and be excited and energized to want to investigate it. Do you understand me? Yes,
thank you, Robina.
Are you sure, Nicholas?
Yeah, yes.
Good, darling. Keep moving, honey.
Yes, this is part of my learning.
Yes, exactly. And so you just move at your own pace. You read the books you like, you check it out, you make sure you've got good sources, because there's a lot of rubbish published out there, but try not to sort of agonize over it. There's no benefit in that. I mean, you agonize, oh, how does acupuncture work? I don't know how acupuncture works. Oh my God, is acupuncture true? Bloody well, read the books and find out, and relax and go one step at a time and enjoy the process. You understand, Nicholas?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So Christina has a view about that, do you? You have a point about that? Good, go honey, unmute. What's your point?
I have a question actually about the I and emptiness.
Okay, good. So hang on a second. How many more questions from before, Amy?
There's just one question from before, which was about pride.
Okay, talk about that and then I can discuss with Christina. Okay, go on. What's the question? Who's asking?
Asks, what about
Maria? Okay, good, Maria. What's the question?
She asked, what about pride, what we think of in the West as a good feeling, such as I'm proud of my new house, I'm proud of being talented in design, etc.
I understand, yeah. Okay, so again, it's the same thing as before, good desire and bad desire. So we've got to, we use these words interchangeably in our culture. So let's understand clearly the difference. If we can recognize that Buddha's describing the neurotic states of mind have this very clear characteristic of being tight, of being I-centered and tight and not comfortable, but sort of, you know, we get preoccupied with them. So pride as a delusion would be an over, and they're all, again, the second point about the delusions is they over-exaggerate, they embellish. That's why they're tight and they're I-based. So pride is attachment is an over-exaggeration of something's deliciousness. Anger is an over-exaggeration of something's ugliness. Pride is an over-exaggeration of my importance. In whatever method, you could be proud of your beautiful nose in an arrogant way. Oh, I've got a better nose. And it usually is competitive. It's usually checking other people's noses. If you're proud about your nose in an arrogant way, in a negative way, you're always checking other noses and reasserting that, wow, my nose is the best. That's pride. It's an overinflated sense of my importance. And of course, it's very subtle in us and it's always there to some degree. But we don't notice it, and we conflate it with a good view, a rejoicing in your good qualities. Like you delight that you're working really hard. You recognize you just passed that exam, and you delight in you really praise yourself. That's not pride, but we have to see the difference, and we have to cultivate the difference, because the delusions are always based upon a neurotic I, and they're always comparing with others, especially pride. So I always use a nice example. No, the other point is this, and this is a bit embarrassing actually, but pride is the flip side of low self-esteem. Now, in our culture, we will very rarely admit to pride, but we love to admit to low self-esteem. We love to hate ourselves. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, if we didn't have pride, we would never have low self-esteem. Low self-esteem is when pride has been deflated, and we then over-exaggerate our ugliness and our hopelessness and our horribleness. And we love to do that. We swim in that one. So if we didn't have pride, we wouldn't have low self-esteem. So if we didn't have pride, what would we have instead? We'd have humility. And you know what we'd have with humility? Self-confidence. It's a very interesting mix. So you think of two people, let's say, who are both really talented, in particular, let's say really talented, let's say both gorgeous looking, just say think something simple. And the one person's proud, arrogant, which means they're very uncomfortable. And they're very easily, and this kind of pride is very fragile. It's an overinflated sense of your importance. You're very conscious about it. And whenever you're with a group of other people, you're always comparing. You're making sure no one else is better than you. And it's very nerve-wracking when you find someone. So if you meet the person who is more beautiful than you, if beauty is the thing you're proud about, you'll be devastated and you'll flip down and you'll become low self-esteem. But let's say there's another person who's also beautiful, but has got self-confidence and is humble. That person is not threatened, is very relaxed about who they are, very unself-conscious, and is delighted to meet another person who is even more beautiful, and they would rejoice in that person and get their secrets from them. They would be a happy, content person. So it's very powerful. And we all have pride. If we have low self-esteem, and that's our major suffering in our culture, that means we have pride, which is we would rather, in other words, low self-esteem is almost like angry. How dare that person be better than me? I want to be better. We don't like to think of it like that. So it's very, very interesting one to look at. So being proud of your success, we use that word and that's perfectly fine. That's rejoicing in your good qualities, rejoicing in your effort, and we must have that. And the irony is when we have pride and low self-esteem, we never rejoice in our good qualities because we always find our bad qualities. So we need to cultivate being delighted in our progress, being happy with your progress, delighted with your job, happy with you did a really good job designing that particular piece and you're delighted in it. That's not pride. We have to see the difference. But we're scared of having that because we think it's pride. So we end up thinking we're just creeps, and that's completely mistaken. I hope that helps, Maria. Good. So all the key every time, Maria, is knowing our own mind well, really having a very sensitive awareness of all the different thoughts and catching them and recognizing what they are. Do you understand, Maria?
Thank you very much. Yes.
Good. Fantastic. So go on, Christina. What's your discussion about emptiness?
Thank you. When you were discussing earlier about the story of you driving down the road at night to Sydney, you mentioned that
Dawn from Melbourne to Sydney.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that you felt the I arising very strongly.
Freaking fast, and you can't believe, this sense of an I freaking out. Of course, exactly.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about the I arising, because I went for a run at nighttime, and I thought, okay, I'll try to make it short. So I thought the tree was a person, and I thought that they were going to attack me, and but then when I looked at it, I saw it was just a tree, but I had this really strong sensation of fear that I was going to be attacked.
Don't go past what the reason is. Just look at the fear. That's the point. The fear is a symptom of believing there's an I. The fear is the symptom of the believing I. That's one you have to look at. That's it.
Okay. But then...
You see how quickly the mind makes up a whole story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
But then I also was wondering, that's just one way that the I appears. And I was wondering, does the I appear in every moment?
It doesn't appear. It's like a sleeping lion most of the time because the delusion is so subtle. What is more prevalent, even attachment is so subtle, we don't even notice it. We only notice attachment when it doesn't get what it wants. That's how subtle attachment is. So we only notice the ego grasping when it gets attacked. So it's even more subtle. So it's just like a sleeping lion that's just there informing everything we do. Even attachment is hard to see. When you have a normal day in life and you get up and the breakfast is there and the weather's nice and you put on the AC and you put on the heater, you close the door, everything's nice. Every second, your attachment is getting what it wants, isn't it? Every second, isn't it? We just call it, oh, this is called happiness. You don't even analyze that there's attachment there. But it's only when the coffee comes out wrong that you get annoyed, and that means you see the anger, which is the sign that there was attachment there. We only notice attachment when it doesn't get what it wants. So we only notice ego grasping when we're attacked and offended, and the I rises like a sleeping lion and we have a panic. So they're so subtle. Even attachment's hard to see, darling.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we've got to catch our mind. First know them what they are and then catch them when they arise. And that means even noticing every day when you're having a nice day, when everything is lovely, we're basically resting on our laurels. We're basically buying into the hubris of attachment because every second you get exactly what you want. And aren't I lucky? We think about, oh, the poor people out there on the street. Think about them for 1 second. We don't know why they don't get what they want. But our attachment every second is getting what it wants. The right coffee, the right taste, the right temperature, the right this. And we have that's called a lovely day. But every second what has happened is attachment been getting what it wants. And we've been feeding into that attachment and buying into the hubris of aren't I lucky. That's called attachment every second. And we never notice it, ever. So catching our mind every second and noticing every time you get the right thing, that's attachment getting what it wants, which is also the fruit of your past virtue. And if you rejoice in it and then see it as empty and offer it, that's practice. But we only practice when the bad things happen. It's too late then. You see what I'm saying?
I think so. So if we're having a moment of seeing attachment arising in ourselves, but then also when we're enjoying the day and seeing that as empty,
much more precise. I'm talking about second by second.
Yeah.
I'm talking about second by second. You get up in the morning and you wake up and you're feeling good. You go, wow, this is incredible. Why do I feel good? Because everything's working. This must have resulted in past merit. I'm not going to waste this day. And then you grab it. And then you have your breakfast and the breakfast is all in the fridge, all delicious. The best quality food, best quality this, best that, best coffee, best milk. We're so fortunate, but it's the fruit of virtue. Every second if you can't if you rest on your laurels, aren't I lucky? And there's a hubris of that. We just take it for granted, the coffee in the fridge. We take it for granted. Our slippers are there ready for our little tootsies when we get out of bed. We take it for granted everything is lovely. That's why we're so fortunate. Every second is a fruit of your virtue. Every second is a fruit of your virtue. Every second by second by second is a fruit of your past virtue. If every second you recognize that and rejoice in it and delight, and then you see it as empty of no inherent nature due to past causes, and then you have it and do it with bodhicitta, that's how you transform it. And then you've got to see your mind more clearly. And then when the bad things happen, you're delighted because now you just realize you purified a bit of negative karma. So it's minute by minute. We've got to catch our mind. Minute by minute, second by second is the real practice.
And is that how we construct the I that we're negating?
What?
Sorry.
Nothing to do with that.
Well,
not right now.
Okay.
That's something. So go on, keep going. What are you saying?
Well, I was just wondering when we notice those parts of ourselves, whether it's like from fear or whether we're noticing the comfort, if we're trying to...
Much harder. Listen, Chris, Because attachment is so primordial, it's much harder to see the I grasping than it is when you just get attacked. That's the time that the sense of an I is threatened. It's even harder to see the attachment arising when you get what you want. What I'm saying is when attachment doesn't get what it wants, when you find there's no coffee in the fridge and you get pissed off, that's when you notice anger, which is meaning that's when you notice attachment. But if you get the coffee you want every time, you don't even notice the attachment. So when you notice the attachment is there when you're angry, when it doesn't get what it wants. You notice the ego grasping is there when someone comes and nearly, you think the tree is a person. So there's a subtle, and we take them for given until they're threatened.
Mm-hmm.
That's why when you don't get what you want is a perfect opportunity to see there's attachment. And when the I is nearly threatened is a perfect opportunity to see the ego grasping. You with me?
Yes, I think so.
Of course you do. Okay. What's next? Any more? Have we got half an hour left? Okay.
Sarah has a question about refuge.
Go, Sarah. Oh, okay, we're going to talk about it tomorrow, but you can talk about it to me today. That's fine. Yes, discuss it today. We're going to do that tomorrow. Did we establish a good time? Was 9 o'clock okay tomorrow for morning for you people?
9 o'clock Melbourne time, yep. And I'll send out an email with those details at the end of today.
Would like to come. But if you want to ask me the question now, Sarah, we'll do it tomorrow, but if you'd like to ask me now, you're very welcome. What's the question, darling?
Hi, Robina. I'm not able to come tomorrow, so I just have a question about it because I had a bit of a aha moment and I spoke to Jason and Amy about it before, so I thought I'd share it. But I just had, I sort of spoke a little bit yesterday about, being associated with a different center and different teachers and stuff. And I think I have been, I guess, connected to the Buddhist path since I was 19. I'm now 36. And I've sort of been chasing this moment in time where I've felt like an accomplished enough practitioner to take vows. And it's been constantly running away from me. Like when I do enough disciplinary practice, when I understand enough theory, that's when I'll take vows. And it keeps being...
It will never, Sarah, it'll never end. That's catch-22. What you're saying is, I'm not going to engage in learning to ride a bike until I can ride a bike well. It's literally insane. The reason to take vows, the reason to take refuge is practice, is to help you grow in practice. That's the point of it. That's the point of it.
So I had that realization this morning when I realized, and I thought maybe I should just take my vows and then I might feel the commitment to actually...
You've got to be very humble and go one step at a time. And if you like the Buddhist path, which is evident you do, then this is the instructions that have been there all the time. So you've got to look at why you've been resisting those instructions. What are you afraid of, I mean, it's sort of like the perfectionist one. I won't ride a bike until I can ride a bike. I won't do that until it's a misconception. And it's like schizophrenic, it's demented. But you have confidence in the Buddhist path.
I do, yes.
Well, then, good heavens, it's one of his first instructions. So then yes, when you're ready, when you've met a teacher that you like, and you feel confident in having checked that teacher, you can then request them for refuge and lay vows. If you can't do it tomorrow, then do you understand?
Sure. So, I guess my question is then, given I've had a disappointment with a teacher, do I need to take time to sort of establish a connection with a teacher? Or if I've been to many teachings with you, I've been to, retreats at Kopan, is it still appropriate to take refuge?
You have to know you're the boss. You have to be confident.
Sure.
And don't feel like you've made such a big mistake. If we take the view that we discussed before, that you take, because still you have to take the view that you don't know this person's a bodhisattva, and that's just you don't know that, so you leave it there. Okay, it is a difficult time, it is a suffering time, but also you just learn from your mistakes. I mean, you learn from these mistakes. I know for myself, my own experience, I don't know if you've heard about the new Kadampa tradition. Have you heard about them?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm not being rude about anybody, but Geshe Khalsan Gyatso, the Lama of that tradition, he was the first teacher that Lama Yeshe invited in the FPMT to one of his centers. It was in England. I mean, that was in 1977. The centers, the FPMT had been going for a few years. There was a couple of centers in Australia, Chenrezig Institute, and then in Melbourne, Tara Institute. They had started, and one in California, one in England, half a dozen. And I met Lama in 76, and maybe there were 13 centers at that point. And then anyway, when I became a nun in 78, Lama, and I was working for Wisdom at Kopan, the publishing. And so Lama sent us all, the Sangha and everything, he sent us all to England, to his new center, Manjushri Institute. And it was an amazing center. It was incredible. 80 people, it was so powerful. The Sangha, we had about 30 Sangha there. Lama started all these education programs. That's when I started studying philosophy. Lamas called it the Geshe program. It was incredible. I was totally immersed in this place. And the Lama there was Geshe Khalsa Gyatso. He was one of the fellow students of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, of their root guru. It's kind of interesting, you know. But then there's a schism happened, this incredible schism. So it was a devastating experience. I mean, I was right there at the time. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. It was really like a war zone. And then when I learned about karma then, though. And Lama Zopa told us at that point, he said, this is the result of breaking our third root tantric vow from past lives, of speaking the faults of your Vajra brothers and sisters. So a Vajra brother and sister is a person whom you've taken initiations in Tantra from the same Lama. And that gives this very strong. So bad mouthing, this is one about speech, bad mouthing from past lives, this terrible schism, like a war zone. I'll never forget that as long as I live. So the point is, I was at that center for 5 years, and I took him as one of my teachers, and I took initiations from him. I got refuge, Bodhisattva vows, and tantric initiations. I saw him as my teacher. And then this thing happened. So it was devastating. But somehow I managed. Many people went crazy. Many people didn't know how to handle this because you've taken the vows. At least you haven't taken the vows. So I remember, really it was devastating for me, but I really had to learn. I'd studied the philosophy, I'd studied the teachings, and that's when I learned about karma, to really know we create our own experiences. So I cannot say with certainty that Geshe Khalsa Gyatso is not a Buddha. I cannot say that, Sarah, with absolute certainty, but I took initiation from him, which means I committed to see him as the Buddha. I don't find that a problem. I've never said one word about him, even though he took my other Lama center. All his students, do you understand? It was a devastating experience. The seeming politics of it all, blaming, you know, horrible. But I made a decision. I cannot decide. I'm not qualified, so I leave it there. And I decided he's in my merit field. He's one of my teachers. And I leave it there, and my mind is comfortable. And I've created no negative karma with it. I've never criticized his students. I haven't agonized over it. And that's because I understand the teachings a bit. And so you protect your mind, Sarah. So that didn't feel like I'd burned, you know, I'd sort of danger, I'm going to back away. I learned that I had to check more carefully, but I also learned I don't know if he's not a Buddha. So you just leave it there, Sarah. You leave it there. And you keep studying, and you keep looking, and you go the steps that are there that your teachers have showed you. That's how you do it. One step at a time. Do you understand? You protect your mind.
Yeah. Great. Maybe I can talk to you another time about refuge.
And get my email from Amy or Jason, and we can discuss. All right, darling?
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's it.
We have 2 more questions in the chat, Venerable Robina. One from Leonie. She asks, how in a moment can we protect our mind from negative thoughts if we don't have the wisdom or skills yet, but are trying hard?
Well, you can't, dear, can you? How can I save myself from a car accident at 100 k's an hour and you can't drive? You can't. Damage control is the best you can do, Leonie. Come on. You do your best, but don't exaggerate your lack of wisdom. You can only use what wisdom you've got. So you've got some wisdom. You're practicing, you're keeping your vows, you're living in a good life, you're attempting to do your best. We only can use what wisdom we've got, and we learn from it. We can only do it. You can only learn you only can use what you've got. The only skill, if you can only got some skill to learn how to drive at 20 kilometers an hour, you do your best. You can't do more. So don't see it as wrong. You know, you use what wisdom you've got, and you learn every second. You get more wisdom as you go, and you learn from your mistakes. That's why purification is so powerful. And you keep growing and keep learning and delighting in your level of practice. Do you understand? Good, darling.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
What else?
John has asked, if you're taking refuge, aren't you taking refuge in the 3 jewels and not necessarily the teacher?
Yes, you're taking refuge in the 3 jewels. That's right. Exactly. But what's interesting, let's analyze this. This is an interesting point. We'll discuss this tomorrow with refuge. But you see, this is the interesting point. The 3 jewels are the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The Buddha is the teacher. And this is the point, that Buddha is the teacher. So at the time of India, you say, okay, what is Buddha? Let's look at what is Buddha. Okay, we'll do this tomorrow. But there are 3 things. There's ultimate relative Buddha, and there's absolute Buddha. There's relative Dharma, absolute Dharma. Relative Sangha, absolute Sangha. So relative, absolute meaning here, absolute Buddha means the actual Buddha mind. Actual, unmanifest, unphysical, mental, all-knowing, all-compassionate consciousness. That's the actual meaning of the word Buddha. The actual Buddha is that. Now, who can communicate with that? We're not clairvoyant. We can't communicate with unmanifest, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-pervasive consciousness. So out of compassion, that Buddha mind manifests in a body that looks like you and me. So that body, in this case, is Mr. Shakyamuni Buddha of 2,500 years ago. So he is the relative Buddha. He's not the absolute Buddha. A Buddha has gone well beyond needing a physical body, well and truly beyond the need to body or to manifest in any form whatsoever. But out of their compassion, they consciously take a body for our benefit. So the Buddha we're talking about is the relative Buddha. Well, that's the Buddha of the time. And guess what he was then? He was the guru then. He was the teacher. So this, you could argue, once you understand that, we are taking refuge in the Buddha and his Dharma, his teachings, and then the Sangha, the spiritual community. So right present, when we realize that Buddha's dead, Buddha's not here now, but we like his teachings. So we need the teacher now who embodies that. That's the meaning of a guru. Heavy with qualities. We need to have the person. Back then you needed the person to be manifesting as a human being, the Buddha, and that's Mr. Shakyamuni. And you wouldn't have known that he was a Buddha back then. I mean, the place was crawling with sadhus in their yellow robes, all running around teaching. You wouldn't have said, oh, there's the Buddha, I can tell by looking. No, you couldn't have looked. He would look like a regular guy, like all the other sadhus. You had to check up, analyze his teachings, and then you decide that you will see him as the Buddha. You can't have been certain he was the Buddha then, and you can't be certain now. So it's the same. That's why we need a teacher now. It's exactly the same principle as the Buddha for us now in the human form. So yes, you're taking refuge in the Buddha of that past. But that is the human being. And that's why they refer to him as Guru Shakyamuni Buddha, the teacher. He was the teacher then. He was the guru then. So we need that person now as well. And that comes naturally after you've taken refuge in the Buddha and his teachings. Then you find people now whom you can learn it from. You can't learn it from Buddha. He's dead. He's gone. You need a person now to learn it from who embodies the teachings for you. Bach is dead. But you know, when my mother was a musician, she was my music guru. She got her music from the previous teacher, who got it from her teacher, who got it from his teacher. And you can track those teachers back in an unbroken lineage of human beings, of music knowledge holders, right back to Bach. That's a valid way to learn Bach. You look at Bach's music, but you have to have a person now teach you. That's the guru of today, who is the Buddha for you. My mother was Bach for me. This is the approach, So, but the answer is yes. You're taking refuge in the Buddha of that time and his teachings and the spiritual community. Yes. Does that make sense? Whoever asked that question? Who asked that question?
It was John.
John,
yes.
Well, oh, there you go, John. Okay, great. That's good. So listen, we've got 20 minutes left. I think we should do the meditation. I mean, there's so much more to talk about. What can we say? We did our best. We talked about a few things. We didn't really get much more into emptiness. There's much more to talk about emptiness, but what to do?
Maybe next time.
Maybe next time. Exactly. We'll do that. So let's just do the meditation again, the purification meditation. We'll finish with that, okay? So just relax, sit upright. So you don't fall off to sleep again. Sit in your couch or your chair with your body upright. Don't slump into the back. And have your feet on the ground planted, so you hold yourself up. Meditators in the full lotus position, they all say that's the best position. The great yogis who meditate for weeks and days, literally, they stay very upright, they stay stable. So having the legs in this full lotus position really helps the body be stable. You don't topple over. That's a great advantage for the great meditators. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama said one time, I remember in one teaching, he said, it's really auspicious if you can start your meditation session sitting in full lotus, because this is the ideal way to sit when the subtler energies are all aligning very nicely, something like that. So it's really creates the cause to be able to do it in the future, because the most advanced practitioners need to sit this way, apparently. So if we can't, that's just fine. If we sit in one leg crossed the other, that's fine. If we can't, we sit in a chair. So if you're sitting in the chair, you keep yourself upright. Don't slump into the back. So your body should be very relaxed, but your body should be upright. I always think of like my skeleton is hanging on a hanger, very straight, but all the muscles and the soft bits are hanging very loosely on the skeleton. So it's a combination of upright but relaxed. As soon as we sit upright, we tense our muscles, especially the abdomen. So flop the muscles. Your shoulders should be square but relaxed. Then your hands in the meditation mudra in your lap or just on your knees as you wish. Then the neck, the head is the main thing. Well, one of the main things. Head slightly forward, chin tucked in. Lips apart, jaw relaxed, tip of the tongue resting behind the top teeth, just near the palate. And this is like, the yogis have found that this helps you not to dribble or not to have to swallow your spit all the time. And your eyes looking downwards beneath your eyelids, as if you're looking along your nose towards the ground. Okay, so we just do our little contemplation. These words, whatever makes sense to you, you think these thoughts. If you don't want to think these thoughts, you don't need to. So our first step, regret, the 4 opponent powers, regret, reliance, the remedy, resolve. As Lama Yeshe says, it's the power. What purification is the power of our regret, the power of our resolve, reliance, the power of the remedy, the power of the resolve. It's our mind that creates negativity. So it's our mind that purifies by creating positivity. We do the work. We rely upon the Buddha. He's our mentor. He's our doctor. We need people to rely upon. Marvelous, but we do the work. So regret is this very wholesome, self-respectful attitude of recognizing that in the past, due to ignorance, literally due to our ignorance, we didn't know the things we said and did sowed negative seeds in our mind that will ripen in the future as our own suffering. We didn't know that. So we think, oh my goodness, I was ignorant. I didn't realize that abortion I had, that killing I did, those ants I killed, those fish I killed, those people I killed, whatever it might be, killing, for example, or the lying, or the stealing, or the bad-mouthing, or the sexual misconduct, or the actions, just a half a dozen really, that harm others, based upon attachment and anger, getting what I want, basically. We didn't realize this. So we think, my goodness, I regret those actions. I regret that I didn't have the wisdom to know. I regret that I did those actions because they've sowed seeds in my mind. And unless I pull those seeds out, they are going to ripen as my future suffering. So I've got to change. So the first step is to own the fact that I've done that. Think this life, actions we've done that have harmed others. And then we think, of course, if it makes sense, just think of anything I've done in the past lives that have sown seeds in my mind that I brought with me now. I don't want them to ripen as suffering. I'm sick of suffering. Absolutely. And if we've taken vows, for example, and we've broken our vows, we think, I don't want to do that again. I don't want to be separate from the Dharma. I want to keep meeting my teachers, meeting the Dharma, have a sane mind, understand the path, meet it easily in the future. So we regret all these actions we've done out of our ignorance that will harm us in the future. I'm sick of suffering. And your delusions, your attachment, your jealousy, your depression, the things that are breaking your heart. Of course, I regret these. They're so stupid, but they're deeply ingrained. Don't blame yourself. I regret them because I'm sick of the suffering. So whom can I turn to give me the methods, the remedies? So we're turning to Buddha here. So imagine Buddha in the bodhisattva aspect, above our crown. If you don't know, don't worry, just relax. Just imagine the energy of the Buddha above your crown. But if you know the form, the Vajrasattva, white light body, radiantly beautiful, sitting on a multicolored lotus, sitting the same way as you. His left hand a bell crossed at his heart, and with the right hand holding a vajra. This is the kind of the union of the two truths, the union of the two wings of the bird, enlightenment. And Vajrasattva really is a tantric aspect of the Shakyamuni Buddha, the bodhisattva aspect, but is particularly related to emptiness. This is why it's so powerful. Because when we realize emptiness, that's when we cut the root of negative karma. So here we're trying to put atomic bombs on those seeds, on those roots, weakening them, giving space for virtue to ripen. So imagine Buddha above our head, and we have a spiritual teacher. We think it's them, their mind manifesting as the Buddha for my benefit. This makes it so personal. And we just delight. Taking refuge means, we can say a formal prayer, but just thinking, I'm so delighted to have a decent doctor. How marvelous. So now the second part, we rely upon suffering sentient beings, and now we think of compassion for those we've harmed. First is compassion for ourselves. Now it's compassion for those we've harmed. I must purify for their sake as well. All these sentient beings I've harmed, the fish I've killed, who created the cause to be killed, for sure. That's their part of the deal. It's interdependent, you know. They created the cause to get killed because we've got this karmic connection between each other. So now we have compassion for them. That baby who came to my womb, whom I killed, that baby had strong karmic connection with me. They came running like a magnet to my womb. So there's a karmic connection between us. They created the cause to be killed by me. That's not denied. But I'm taking responsibility for my part of it. Because I want to cut this thing. I want to stop it. So such compassion for that creature, that little girl in my body, or little boy, whoever it was. And then they got mangled, so they had to have another D&C. So I think of that. You know, have compassion for that sentient being I harmed. You know. And I have compassion for the doctors and the nurses who did my wish, who killed it for me, you know. Have compassion for all the beings. You have compassion for all the beings we've harmed. Because we know they don't want suffering either, just like me. And then if we can, we have compassion for those who've harmed us. Why? Just like those nuns. Of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we had harmed them in the past and because they will suffer in the future because of their negative karma. So that's the basis of real compassion. If we can, if we've been raped, abused, if our father harmed us, if people have harmed us in the past, if we can have compassion for them, because out of their ignorance, they harmed us. And because we've harmed them in the past. So there's interdependent relationship between us. I have such compassion for them too, because they're going to suffer in the future. So I must purify for all these sentient beings' sake. Another remedy. We imagine the Buddha very happily, so blissfully, sending this powerful hose of nectar, like liquid energy, arcing around from his heart, entering our crown, and then forcefully filling us so powerfully, driving out all the imprints first of all these seeds we've ever planted in our mind from actions of our body of harming sentient beings since beginningless time, driving them out, washing them out. They all forcefully leave the lower parts of our body as like filthy liquid, disappearing into space. How amazing. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakto Mebawa Sarvasiddhi Memprayata Savakama Sutsame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarvatatagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutokayo Suposhayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorato Mebawa Sarvasiddhi Memprayata Savakama Sutsame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarvatatagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabhava Mahasamaya Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorato Mebawa Sarvasiddhi Memprayata Savakama Sutsame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarvatatagata Vajramame Mutsa Vajrabha Mahasamaya Sattva Ahung Pe. Totally washed out. Imagine this. You see, the point is, we think, oh, this is fantasy. Come on. No, it's not. If you realize emptiness right now, and the strength of your mind is what allows you to, all those negative karmas will be instantly cut at the root. This is the point. Cut at the root. So that the power of our conviction and our wish that this be is what makes us purify. The point that Prue said yesterday was a very important point. Are we still, even though we purify, are we still bad? You know, that's because of ego grasping, believing I'm bad. That's the irony of ego. It's nonsense. Have confidence, want to purify, want to change. And it's the power of that makes you change. So again, Lama Vajrasattva so compassionately sends powerful nectar from his heart that arcs around, enters our crown and fills us. And this time forces up to the surface all the imprints of all the negative speech we've ever done since the beginning of time, all the rubbish vomiting out our mouths that have harmed sentient beings. forced out up from the top part of our body, disappearing like liquid, filthy liquid, disappearing into space. Just like when you turn on a tap in the sink, as Lama Yeshe says, the junk in the glass comes to the surface. Disappeared into space. Be so delighted. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Norato Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Sitam Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe. Totally annihilated all the imprints of all the negative actions about our speech. It's all as humans, isn't it? Disappeared, gone like into space, full of this blissful nectar. And now this time Lama Vajrasattva sends very compassionately all these beams of light. We imagine arcing around and entering like laser beams, so powerful, entering our crown, filling us instantly. And as Lama says, instantly, like a light when you turn it on in the room, it dispels the darkness instantly, isn't it? Same here. Imagine all the ego grasping, all the delusions, all the causes of, now the causes of our suffering, all the delusions annihilated, annihilated by this blissful white light. How amazing. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe. And now, not only that, we've just removed the obstacles to our liberation. Now we have to remove the obstacles to our Buddhahood, our omniscience, which is even like the subtle imprints. It's a bit like a second rinse. You've cleaned up all the washing, and now you do another rinse, and it removes even the subtlest imprints. Or you remove the garlic from the jar, and now you have to remove the smell. These subtle imprints are like that. You're liberated. You don't come back. You can't come back to samsara. You're done. But you've got more to remove. And that's what's enhanced. That's what's enhanced when we do bodhicitta, when we practice the compassion wing. That gives them much more power to all the realizations, So this time, imagine all three together. Liquid going down, liquid going up, nectar going down and up in the light. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Dido Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suposhayo Mebawa Anorakta Mebawa Sarva Siddhi Memprayatsa Sawa Kama Sutsame Siddham Shriyam Kuru Hung Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tatagata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe Vajrasattva sama manupala Vajrasattva patita dita me bawa Sudoshayo me bawa Suboshayo me bawa Anorato me bawa Sarvasidi me prayasa Savakama Sutsame Sidam Sriam Kuru Hung Ha Ha Ho Bhagavan Sarvachata Gata Vajramame Musa Vajraba Mahasama Sattva Ahung Pe. How amazing. Purified all the delusions, all the karmic seeds of negative actions of body and speech, and even all the subtle imprints. And now we've purified even the obstacles to omniscience. How incredible. All of these delusions and these seeds of these delusions, all adventitious, not at the core of our being. This is why they can be removed. If they were truly intrinsic in us, then we could never change. It's very simple. This is the teaching of emptiness. Because they have no intrinsic nature, they are therefore completely removable. That should give us great confidence. No matter how miserable we are, no matter how negative we are, we know it's not at the core of my being. This is what we have to be confident about. The depression is there, the anxiety is there. Of course it is, it's ancient habits, but it's not at the core of your being. Identify with your goodness. Identify with your Buddha nature. This gives great courage. And we just live with the silly rubbish and ignore it, you know. Not like that quite, not silly. But you actively identify with your Buddha nature, actively identify with your goodness, with your virtue, because it's all that is there. We just obsess about the bad stuff. So silly. To be delighted, purifying like this. So fourth step, we make decisions now. So, you know, we maybe have taken vows, maybe haven't. And if we have, we reiterate our intention to keep the vows. I will not kill, I will not steal. And that strengthens that habit in your mind. Every day you say it, it deepens the groove in your mind of that habit. And anything, you know, maybe you've got some decisions to make, like your old habits, like your laziness, or you can't be bothered, or your bad mouthing, or your shooting, like we were talking before, you know, to I forgot your name, darling, the one with a son, you know, make a decision. I will control my speech tomorrow. I will not say one negative word. This is such a powerful practice, I tell you, that we can control our speech. It's incredible. One day at a time, make a vow. I'll watch my speech and not say that bad word. It's so powerful. In the morning, you remember it and you will keep it. Any other actions you want to do? Maybe give up, you know, eating too much, or things that you know that are the things that harm you and you're sick of your habits. Make some decisions, 24 hours at a time, maybe like the AA people, 24 hours at a time, you know. It's very encouraging. Make your own decisions, habits, decisions you want to resolve to change. You're talking to yourself. You're being your own friend. So now we imagine the guru, you know, we'll think of it as our guru if we feel close to somebody, and as the Buddha, kind of delighted, dissolves into white light, enters our crown. And we imagine now, just for a few minutes, we think the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha, the body, speech, and mind of the Lama, and our body, speech, and mind merge. Same thing. We become full of this marvelous potential, our own potential, our fantastic. So just expand yourself, as big as the universe, blissful, clear. No thoughts. No thoughts. Okay, that's it. Imagine now. Yeah, imagine, be delighted, totally rejoice, not just in the meditation, but since we've been here 3 days together. All these thoughts we've had, most haven't gone, none have gone astray. We don't remember them. It doesn't matter. We nourish them. We want to nourish to be planted, be so happy. So never working at our own level, with our own pace, listening, thinking, analyzing, reading, contemplating, taking all this view as our hypothesis. Just relax into it. Using our intelligence, checking on the teachers, checking on the, there's a lot of rubbish around. So be confident, like Sarah's talking. Be confident. And go one step at a time, that's it. Having confidence in our marvelous potential and confidence in our ability to help others according to our own levels. One step at a time. Okay.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. So we'd like to finish with the dedication prayers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll share on the screen.
So yeah, what we're doing here, what are you going to do? Which ones? Okay. Yeah, do this. So look at the word. So the words are saying, look at it, due to this virtue. And the virtue means, you see, virtue, we mightn't use that word too often. It just means positive. So we're done listening to these teachings, thinking about their meaning, aspiring to develop qualities, aspiring to help others. That's incredible. Should be blissed out how we've spent this time together. Due to all of this, these imprints in our mind, may I quickly become a Buddha. This is the whole point, like we motivated. And I help all sentient beings, without exception, will lead them to that state. How amazing. And then the second one, we say it, where is it? Jangchub. This one. May the precious supreme body. So bodhicitta, we never got to talk about it. I'm so sorry. Bodhicitta means literally awakening thought, which is kind of boring. So what it's referring to is this outrageous attitude, which is the culmination of compassion. We didn't even discuss all this. I'm so sorry. It's the culmination of compassion. It's not equivalent to compassion. It's the culmination of incredible compassion. And this great compassion, which is unique to the bodhisattva. So compassion is, may other beings not suffer. Great compassion is the unique one of the bodhisattva that says, I will make it happen. It's my job. It's the job description of a bodhisattva, this courageous attitude that is up to me, like a mother for her child. A mother never doubts that it's her job. She sees her kid drowning. Of course, she's got compassion, but she's got great compassion. She knows it's her job. And even if she can't swim, she's in that water. That's great compassion. And on that culminates as this outrageous attitude. It's got two parts, bodhicitta. One is you never stop wanting to help sentient beings, wanting to liberate them from suffering. And second, you never give up working on yourself life after life, becoming a Buddha, because then you're qualified. So may that grow and grow in the hearts of all. And then where it hasn't grown, may it grow. Okay, Jason.
Lama Sangye Drugyone Roa Chikyam Malupa Dehi Sala Pasho Jangchub Senchub Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchi Ye Panyam Pame Pali Gong Ne Gong Drupewa Sho. And Venerable Robina, we would also like to offer you a long life prayer, please.
Okay. So I think when we say this prayer, Lama Zopa wrote this prayer, whatever, someone asks, so he did it out of kindness. But we think, it's just this, it's a very nice Tibetan tradition, actually, of us making these aspirations that our teachers live long. So if you don't, if you have your teachers, you think right now, as we're singing this one, think of may all the holy beings, may Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa, all these holy beings, may all our gurus live long. Because we need badly on this planet good people leading the way, don't we? Do we think like that?
Mother of the victorious ones, the 3 times and 10 directions, Dharmakaya, the great bliss, embraced by great compassion. But Paritara, in the ordinary form, other godless, beautiful, transmigrating beings left guideless, how kind you are. May all your wishes be instantly fulfilled, and may your life be stable until samsara ends. Almighty One, you who destroy all the enemy of delusions, who reveal the Dharma of scripture and realization, spreading a continuum of transmigrating
beings,
how
unlimited observations, including their imprints,
how kind you are.
kind you are.
May
May
all
all your wishes be instantly fulfilled. May your life
be stable until samsara ends. By the blessings of the Guru, the deity, and the Dharma protectors, and unbetraying actions and their results, as well as the truth of ultimate reality, in all my lifetimes, may I only please and never displease for even 1 second the Guru, and may the vital points of my prayers be fulfilled. Thank you. And we have some dedications as well.
That let's think of all the people who've died, who are suffering, anybody we want to pray for. We put our energy together and we say, you know, think of them. So say some names. Yes, wonderful.
So for people who have recently died, Scott Bowie, Judith Catherine Hogg, Henry Kernayawan, and for other loved ones who are in need of our prayers, Stelios Politis, Ash, Pam, Becky and Damien Marley, Peter Piercy, Christine Sundojo, Ewan Hall, Oe Boon Leng, Henry Asali, Irene and Edmund Pham, and the creators, staff and shareholders of Zoom for granting us access to so much online Dharma at the moment. May all their endeavours be successful.
I saw they're making millions of dollars, so that's what you have to rejoice. Good on them at the right time in the right place. Wasn't it amazing?
And,
okay.
And William Black.
Okay. All right, people.
And thank you, Robina.
Thank you, darling. Thank you so much.
Our minds are butter, and you are the heat clarifying us into delicious ghee.
Good Lord, what a vision, what an image.
And
all of you.
We have an offering, but it will come electronically. So I'm offering my phone because the people have been extremely generous, and so a generous offering will be made electronically.
Every penny of it will go to my bodhicitta trust, which is what helps people do things, you know. So you're so great. I'm so happy with that. We have lots of different projects, and we're doing a website soon because we've got many projects, and it's just really nice to show what it's doing. So many people are very generous and kind, so I'm so grateful. It will all go to the Bodhicitta Trust. When I first started in 2005, I remember asking Lama Zopa for a name of this trust, and he said, you can't call it anything else but the Bodhicitta Trust, he said. What a lovely name.
Thank you so much. And please, a very, very long life.
Yeah,
at least 150 years. Like Joe Hockey says, we all can.
Okay,
please return. Teach us on emptiness next time, please. As soon.
Bodhicitta. We have to do Bodhicitta.
Emptiness and bodhicitta, please.
Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Never give up. Stay optimistic. Okay.
Stay well.
Good night, Robina.
Thank you.
Much love. Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you, everyone. Thank you, Amy.